But since he's not here, maybe you could speak a little bit about the nature of your collaboration with Gabino. You guys have worked together in film context before, but this is his first director credit. He works more often in visual arts, theater, performing arts.
Yeah, so just to be clear, my film was the second film, just for those who... yeah, so I co-directed this with Gabino Rodriguez, who is... he recently changed his name, so his name is Lázaro Rodriguez now. He's a performance artist and theater director, and he acts in most of the films that I've done, and this is the first time we collaborate as co-directors. And when I wrote the screenplay for the film, and it was quite a different film, and it was based on the writings of Mario Villatin, who's the writer that appears in the middle of the film. And so I had read several of his novels, and I created kind of a screenplay. A lot of the things that we were shooting were not working out in relation to screenplay, and so a lot of the things that end up in the screen are actually ideas that Gabino had that had a lot to do with, I guess, his practice. So I would film a lot of the sort of everyday kind of scenes in the school, for example, and he would stop it and ask the kids to walk behind each other's footsteps, or cover their eyes with their hands, and do kind of like a lot more sort of performance type gestures. So I guess our co-direction was like at a balance between his universe of more performance art and my universe of perhaps more observational documentary. But we both enjoy fiction a lot, so we kind of constructed the fictional tales together.
Maybe you could say a little bit more about the participation of Mario Villatin, who does show up, and maybe how he contributed.
So Mario's books were the inspiration for the whole project. So because of that, and you probably you don't know this guy, but he's, I think, quite an interesting writer. Most of his books are about himself. So he even has an autobiography that's a book that has 3 autobiographies, and they're like all very different to one from the next. And in almost every one of his works, he's the main character. And because of that, and I was interested in his book, so I invited him to be in the film as well. And kind of that's why he appears there. And I wanted some of his world to be in the film to a certain degree. It's the original screenplay was based directly on his work, but this is maybe what's left is more like a feeling of some of his works, not so much the works themselves.
Still hence the title, Mi piel luminosa.
Yeah, so he has it's funny because he saw the film, and he saw that I titled it after one of his short stories called Mi piel luminosa, and I'd made a film in the past called The Palace, and last week he emailed me because he writes on his phone. It's kind of weird. He sent me via WhatsApp an entire short story, and he called it The Palace. He's like, "You stole my title, I steal yours." But yeah, he's a pretty interesting guy. Yes.
I hope you make a cameo in it. Are there questions from the audience for Nico about the film? Yes. The question is about the location you chose.
I mean, it was more all the locations ended up being like they were practical decisions. So I had envisioned the school and the monastery, and I knew someone that taught at a rural school, so I contacted her and I visited it, and it was the one that I found. And then the kids that are in the film are kids that go to that school, and some of the women teach there as well. And so it was, it was a way also to make it more organic. So like once I had chosen the location, then everybody that frequents that space had to be there as well, I guess. And the monastery it's a art museum now. It used to be a convent, but now it's a modern art. No, yeah, I think it's a contemporary art venue in a small town in Mexico. And I knew the curator there, so I contacted him.
Yes.
collaboration means to you, because you also work with Rafael dos Santos, and I've only seen a few of your films, but in each collaboration it's very different. So I would love to hear about what it means for you to be kind of part of a collective and as a creator.
Questions about the nature of collaboration in your larger.
Yeah, and in fact, even the films that I do by myself, like that, I know that I sign as director myself. Most of them I work with this theater group called Lagartijas Tiradas al Sol, which are this theater group from Mexico City, and their presence in the films changes completely what I do. So in a way, they're also collaborations. It's just that perhaps, I mean, credits are strange things because many people end up doing many things that are uncredited for and so on. But I guess there is no one way. It's dramatically different. My collaboration with Gabino in this film than my collaboration with Andrea and my previous film. And I made a film with a Danish director, editor called Jakob Schulzinger, and it was also very different. And I think it's like friendships or like anything in life, like it's not that you have a way of having a friendship. It's depending on who you spend time with is different. There's not one, and it's kind of organic. So in the case of this one, it was strange because Gabino and I are very close, and one of our problems, I think, is that we trust one another more than we trust ourselves. So if I doubt an idea, I will tell it to Gabino, and Gabino will automatically agree with it because it's coming from me, and vice versa. So like he will and so we can very easily go in very bad directions because we kind of we have this strange relation we spend a lot of time together. We never fight. We just kind of have a very easy, perhaps too easy. Like we use each other for validation, and so. That's not necessarily, and we realized this when we were editing, of course. And so the film, that's why it ended up being something so different. But for example, also in this particular film, like he's not a filmmaker and he's not that, I think he didn't care that much if we finished the film or not. And so he was not, we filmed this 2 years ago and it was just sitting there for a long time because it was not really working. And then when I picked it up again and I was trying to get him to help out, I was doing most of the work in terms of like the lifting, like getting the stuff, making sure the footage existed on the computer and doing all the work. And then I would edit something, I would send it to him. We don't live in the same city, so like he would send me a WhatsApp message in 5 minutes explaining everything I had to change. So I would go and I would work for a week on all his ideas, and then he would do the same. And so I feel that a lot of the stuff that's on screen are his ideas, but I put them together. So it's a strange collaboration in that sense. And each one of the collaborations have been radically different.
Did the children contribute at all?
I mean, of course they do in many ways, right? Because they're perhaps not in such conscious ways, but like the opening scene that I like, even though it's not like a beautiful shot or anything, but this sort of uneasiness in relation to performance, which is nice. I mean, they're more subjects than anything, and that's, I guess, like a bigger question of how much do subjects contribute in filmmaking, which is a complicated thing. The film wouldn't exist without them in many ways, but at the same time, it's not like they were giving us any input. Some stories here and there, they would tell that we kind of modify it a bit, perhaps, but not in an active sense, at least not in this project.
Some people might have seen Eric Baudelaire's in Film Dramatique here in the past few days, also in Wavelengths, shot with school children outside of Paris. It's interesting to see the two sort of in dialogue with each other.
I haven't seen it yet.
Other questions from the audience, perhaps? Yes.
He's my son, and so I was living in Mexico at the time, and when I went to make this film, Andrea, my wife and collaborator as well, wanted to come along, and she helped out quite a bit in many things, and we had to bring our kid because we had nowhere to leave him, and so so at some point we came up with it. He was not in the original idea for the film, but then we thought there was something very striking. It was kind of, it's, you know, race is a very complicated issue, and my son is, I mean, he's pretty white, and so seeing him interact in this context of the small town, the school, was striking in and of itself. Also, his Spanish was pretty good already, more or less, but he was more used to speaking in English than speaking in Spanish. And anyway, so there was something striking there. And so that's how we introduced that. That's the whole story, more or less. We hadn't come up with the entire story at that point, where we knew there was this thing about this white kid in isolation, and Gabino had made a performance work where a room got filled with smoke over time. He was in it, and it was nothing to do, but aesthetically it was in that direction. So I told him to bring his smoke machine just in case. And so then things came together, and we thought it was kind of nice. And then I just told my son to sit around, and all the actions that he does, it was just because he was bored, and he was just...
Other questions from the audience for our filmmaker? Yes.
Outside of Mario and Collaborator, what were your cinematic reference points? I felt like the tonal points in the narration reminded me of like Chris Parker movies. I don't know.
Any cinematic references, maybe Chris Parker?
I mean, oddly enough, because I tend to have a lot of cinematic reference for many of my films, actually, and I can just spout names generally when I think of many of my films. But I think because this film was constructed in such an odd way, and the collaboration with Gabino and the text from Mario, I was totally in a different... Yeah, we hardly talk... Gabino doesn't watch so many movies. We hadn't... it was not somehow in our mind, and I wish I had a better answer, because I watch a ton of stuff, and I'm sure there is a lot of influence of things that I watch, but I cannot think of anything in concrete. Sorry.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
I thought it was a really great film. Like at first I completely thought it was a documentary. I was going along with it, and then as it got more and more surreal, it's just a very interesting world. Just about the kid in the quarantine, was that from the writer or from your head? And I kind of wonder, like, what did it mean to you, because it's a very like heavy symbol. So like, what do you really, what does it really say to you?
The image of the child in quarantine was where it came from, and the meaning behind it.
Yeah, the idea came from none of us, but from Luisa Pardo, who's an actress of many of my films, but also a collaborator of Gabino in their theater company. And they were doing I'll just give a small story. They were giving a workshop at CalArts, a theater workshop, and they asked one of the students, as a woman, to play an indigenous girl, but she was a very white redhead woman with freckles, and so she would have like a big picture projected of an indigenous child, and then she would start talking and saying that that was her, and she was born in this place in Oaxaca, and then she was brought to the United States, and slowly she had lost the pigmentation in her skin, and you know, that was her now, and it became problematic for her to do this. She's like, if I do this, they're gonna kill me in my school, and I can't, you know, like adopt this persona of an indigenous person. It's kind of a touchy subject. It's not something that I feel comfortable doing on stage. And so they discussed a lot this, and then they didn't do anything with the project because it seemed that it was not possible to represent it in such context. And they had told me this story. So in fact, when I put together the edit, because it was not till the editing that I'd come up with a voiceover, because I'd heard the story from Luisa, and one of the things I liked about this story was that it is very heavy-handed, but it's unclear what it means. I don't, and that's what I like. It's kind of very obvious. You understand the sort of the, you can visualize it, yet it's politically ambiguous, and it's politically incorrect, but it's not quite clear why. It's not exactly something that you can be outraged about because it's difficult to put your thoughts together in relation to it. I don't know if that makes, or at least for me. And so that's kind of what I liked it, because I don't know exactly what it means, but it makes me think about many things and reflect upon many things. It's similar to when I see my son playing soccer with his kids and feeling like there's something that's odd about this. And obviously there's many things, there's many sort of things to talk about social class and race in Mexico, but it's not like it has a message or a very concrete understanding. And so that's kind of what I like about it, that you can think about it in many different ways, unless someone disagrees. But I feel like it's very difficult to pinpoint a concrete message.
Time for one more question. Yes, please. The use of sound and silence.
Yeah, some things are very hard to talk about precisely because they're not discursive. It's mainly because of how something feels. So it has to do more with music, I guess, and with there is no. Has to do with kind of structural things, like, you know, we spend a lot of time listening to this very loud sound of the guys in the masks and in white, and then so the next, when it cuts, if it continues to be noisy, then it loses power, I guess, what came before. So it's a way to give it sort of contrast in the music. The same with lightness and darkness as well. So like to cut from some things that are super bright to things that are super dark, also create some kind of structural tension that helps. There is very little to hold on to in terms of narrative, of course. So these things help, I hope, keep some level of engagement with what's going on. So as opposed to having like the sound at the same level throughout and things like that, I guess perhaps I could adventure myself to say that many times the structure of films are based on plot or storyline or even concepts or ideas, and so when or character development or things like that, and so when you have that, you can maintain formal elements throughout the same because you're engaged in something that is moving forward in terms of plot or stories. But when you don't have that to hold on to, then you have to find perhaps other formal structures that help you maintain some kind of engagement.
Maybe time for a quick one if anybody else has another question. Otherwise, maybe we can just thank Nico again for
Thank you so
being
much.
so generous and sharing your fun with us. And thank you all for coming. Please enjoy.
Thank you.